can't wait to go home tonight and tell my wife she's married to a young Captain Kirk. See, that doesn't spice things up a bit, but okay. No time for jokes when you only got 7 minutes. My question is, which form of investment nets the greatest return? Addressing symptoms or addressing underlying causes? On the surface, this seems like a very easy question to answer. As important as it is to address symptoms in our society, I can't help but think, if you ask yourself, would we be better to prevent homelessness or just relieve, help the homeless and feed them, etc.? Would we be better to prevent cancer or would we be better to just treat it? Would we be better to prevent poverty or would we be better to just alleviate it? Not difficult questions to answer, I wouldn't think. Yet, I will contend in this speech that even though that you would think would be where we should be putting our attention, I would argue for 4 reasons we don't, that this sector is hugely underinvested in dealing with root causes. It's because of the way the sector is funded, the way the sector is measured, the way the sector is managed, and the way the sector is regulated. And in 7 minutes, I don't have much time to deal with each of those, but I'll scratch on the surface of each of them. On the funding side, if you want to deal with root causes, you need long-term funding that is comfortable with risk and isn't afraid of failure. I would argue that's exactly the opposite of the type of funding that funds most of the sector. Most of the sector is funded short-term with grants tied to specific programs. It's funded, in other words, to solve symptoms, not root causes. And I would argue most funders are risk-averse, both the government, by the nature of government, but I would argue even foundations, which I would believe should be the source of a lot of risk capital, with some wonderful exceptions, aren't. And because I think most donors want to be successful, and it's much easier to actually fund something where you're feeding the homeless and you can see the results of that, than it is to make a bet on a 10-year systems change initiative that you won't see results for 10 years and has a high degree of failure. So again, we don't have the funding that lends itself to root causes. I'd say the way the sector is measured also reinforces this. The proxy for good, effective management and effective charities is your ratio of how much you spend on program-related expenses versus non-program-related expenses. The higher that ratio of program-related expenses, the more efficient and effective you are in terms of the proxy of measurement of efficient charities. Well, guess what? It is a lot easier to look good on that measurement if you are dealing with symptoms than if you were trying to deal with root causes. And if you look at the difference between the private sector, in the private sector, if a company has 6 months of cash in hand to cover operating expenses, in effect, 6 months worth of cover burn rate, nobody wants to invest in them. They're on the verge of bankruptcy because they don't have the money to invest in the long run. If you're a charity and have 6 months worth of cash on hand, you seem to be swimming in dough. There's no point in funding that organization. It doesn't need the money is the way the measurement framework works. Well, that might be true if you're only dealing with symptoms. If you're trying to work on things that are 10 years of trying to prevent homelessness, you're not going to have any of the cash you need for R&D and things like that. The way the sector is, that's funded, the way it's measured, the way it's managed, when you're measured and funded that way, guess what management is really good at? They're really good at survival skills. They're really good at figuring out how to get to the next quarter. They are magicians at making something out of nothing in terms of the way they're funded. But those aren't the skills and competencies needed to deal with root causes. If you're going to deal with root causes, you actually need to be good at long-term planning. You need to be good at R&D. You need to be good at multi-stakeholder collaboration. And you need to be good at risk and failure and learning fast. Well, that isn't what our funding and measurement systems are rewarding or nurturing. And the final one, I would say, is the way the sector is regulated. Now, 7 days let alone 7 minutes, isn't enough for me to tell you why I think CRA is the wrong regulator for encouraging social innovation in this sector. But suffice to say that our definition, our regulatory definition of what a charity is based on 300-year-old case law, where what you did was you gave out meals to the homeless. You didn't try and solve homelessness. And we at Social Capital Partners were the lucky recipient of a site visit from CRA, where amongst the 4.5 pages of deficiencies that were outlined for us, they explicitly said, Social Capital Partners, we think you are more concerned about the prevention of poverty, not the alleviation of poverty. The alleviation of poverty, that is an acceptable charitable object. The prevention is not. Dealing with symptoms is okay in our regulatory environment. Dealing with root causes is offside. So, even though I think the answer to the question is clear, I think there are these 4 factors that get in the way of, as a sector, actually being able to invest where there's the greatest return on that investment. Or put another way, until we deal with the root cause of why we can't deal with the root cause, we won't be dealing with the root cause. Thank you.